Steph Curry is the best three-point shooter of all time because he's made the most shots. Tom Brady is, unfortunately, the best Super Bowl quarterback of all time because he has the most rings. But what if you want to measure the best and there's no stats to back it up? Let's see what we can do. I'm Eric, welcome to Utini, and today we are on the search for the best Star Wars movie. There are a few things that fans love more than ranking things. I mean, we did a video on that a couple months ago, but whether that's good or not, it's an undeniable part of fan culture. Now, of course, I have my own ratings, and I'll show them to you later, but today is not about mine or anyone else's subjective list. It's about seeing if we can find the actual best film. We have 11 options to answer this question, but in order to figure out which film is going to take the crown, we need to figure out what makes a great Star Wars movie. Is it pure enjoyment? Is it critical acclaim? Is it importance to Star Wars as a whole? All of these things are possible when it comes to ranking your favorite Star Wars film, but I think we need to go a bit deeper. For our search today, I've broken down 5 key factors that make a phenomenal Star Wars movie. They are storytelling, spectacle, cinematography, world building, and character work. Today, we're going to go through each of these factors, define them, and figure out which of these 11 films best showcase their talents. All right, first things first, let's start with storytelling. Storytelling can be the most basic concept of all, but it is also possibly the most crucial. Storytelling at its core is responsible for guiding us through the journey of the whole story. In Star Wars, it also tells us the stakes of what's happening. Is this galactic? Is it Force-centered? Is it intimate? And it's also responsible for telling us the consequences of this hero's journey. What's going to happen, and are we going to get to a satisfying conclusion at the end? Basically, is this a story I want to be a part of? Perhaps the most important storytelling of all comes in the OG. Episode 4, Star Wars, A New Hope, pick your poison, whatever you want. Basically, this sets up the storytelling that is responsible for the continuation of the entire universe. If we don't care about Luke, we don't get more movies. And yet we do. George Lucas introduces us to a story of a farm boy from the middle of nowhere, and we are enraptured in his story so much that we now care about the fate of the galaxy. And sure, you can attribute the success of the story to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, but none of that structure matters if we don't care about Luke. So yes, episode 4 is a masterclass in classic storytelling. However, it also works when we want to flip those conventions on their head in episode 8, The Last Jedi. In this movie, Rian Johnson redefines the classic hero narrative. He basically flips the whole thing on his head and uses the conventions of the past to tell a brand new original story in the present. I mean, think about it. As opposed to the classic reluctant hero, Johnson gives us a reluctant master, who we see through the eyes of an eager student, and in that way, we're able to see what we expect as a classic hero's journey completely flipped on its head in this new trilogy. I mean, we are on our toes 8 movies into a 9-movie saga? That's not an easy feat. And finally, is there a more gripping challenge than trying to keep an audience's attention when they know how your story's gonna end? Well, that is exactly the challenge that was met and exceeded by the folks that made Rogue One. In this movie, we all know that at the end, the Death Star plans are gonna be gotten and Darth Vader is gonna wreck the Tantive 4. But the writers do something very important with the storytelling on this. They make us care. By introducing characters that we instantly connect with, Rogue One sets them against the backdrop of unapologetically realistic warfare, and in doing so creates a narrative that, yes, functions as part of the whole of Star Wars, but is absolutely 100% its own. It's airtight, it's crisp, and it works. You know what? It probably shouldn't, but it really does. And frankly, that's a miracle. Clear, wonderful storytelling is so important to a fantastic film. And if we're looking for the best Star Wars film, it definitely needs storytelling locked down. And if you think of some of these films during your search for your favorite Star Wars movie, there's a better chance than not that you value storytelling in a very high way. But that being said, there are a few things that set Star Wars apart from other franchises than giant spectacle. When Star Wars first arrived on the scene in 1977, yes, you heard how the story was great and you heard that it was going to change movies forever, but you really kept hearing the same word over and over: spectacle. Because this thing showed us things and made us hear things that we had never known before. It was a visual and auditory spectacle that we had never experienced. Because do we love complex stories here? Yes, we do. Do we love complex character arcs? Absolutely. But sometimes there is majesty in things that go boom. It also helps that Star Wars spectacle often coincides with revolutionary filmmaking techniques. So let's see which of the films tackle these the best, starting off with Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Specifically, pod racing. That's right. pod racing, a 15-minute racing extravaganza that combines the excitement of Formula One with aliens, and some people say it's too long. Incorrect! There is nothing like seeing the pod race on the big screen. It truly defines the spectacle of Star Wars. I mean, even 20 years later, there is nothing that comes close to combining the excitement of sport and science fiction in the same way. It's exciting, it's exhilarating, it's spectacular. But I do think we can expand our scope a little bit more. In Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, specifically the opening battle of Coruscant, because oh my god, this is hands down the coolest opening in all of Star Wars. And honestly, it's up there with the opening of all movies, period, thank you very much. It is part galactic battle, part dance choreography, as we see a giant space battle flying over the galactic capital filled with thousands of starships and explosions. You know, George didn't need to tell us the stakes of the galactic war, all right? He showed us with tons of ships fighting each other with lasers, as you should. But sometimes you just need to build a bigger gun, which is exactly what we did in Episode 7, The Force Awakens. You know, sometimes we do kind of forget the scope and scale of Star Wars, but not here. In this movie, the scope is galactic. I mean, think about it. We have a planet that is now a gun that is shooting lasers to destroy multiple other planets, while Han Solo sets up explosive charges to break the planet apart before a lightsaber battle happens as the Earth splits beneath them. Like, are you kidding me? My gosh. Now, that isn't to say that spectacle is always a good thing, right? I mean, it can absolutely be overused and to the point where scenes can be completely incoherent, or it can just be used to kind of hide storytelling inconsistencies. But when it is wielded properly, it can be wonderful. It can really help the audience understand the stakes of the scenes. It can be used to enhance the fantastical nature of the world, and sometimes it's just about the pure awesomeness that brings a smile to your face. And if you like these things, then maybe spectacle is very important to you. Maybe these movies are at the top of your search for the best Star Wars film. But if they don't resonate with you, that's all right, because maybe you put just a little more importance on the idea of cinematography. Cinematography is a word that gets thrown around in a bunch of circles, both pretentious and non, but at its core, it just means the artistry of the camera, right? It's what we're seeing in the movie. Because yes, all the pieces can be on the board, the writing can be great, the acting phenomenal, but it all means nothing if we can't actually see what's happening. And if some of these films really kind of do it for you, if they are the key ones on your journey to finding the best Star Wars film, then it's pretty likely that a well-made shot can send chills up your spine even more than just an explosion. Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Now, this movie changed the game for a bunch of different reasons, and obviously the story continuation was key, but that's not why it's on our journey today. It's here because of this. The Luke and Vader duel is one of the most pivotal points in all of Star Wars. Yes, because of all the gravitas that the story has, but also because it is one of the most gorgeously constructed pieces of film in the history of Star Wars. I mean, the way they use darkness and light alone in this scene shows us the stakes of the fight without any words being needed. And even before that fight, one of the most romantic gestures that we see in all of Star Wars is showcased in the most beautiful lighting pattern imaginable. Yes, sure, the real world isn't all oranges and blues, but realism can take a seat to magic if the scene depends on it. But hey, maybe Cloud City doesn't do it for you. That's fine. Maybe you're thinking about something a little more rustic, a little more cowboy. Might I suggest Solo, A Star Wars Story? One of the most underrated films in Star Wars for a lot of different reasons, but especially the way the camera takes us through the story of our favorite galactic gunslinger. The influences on Solo are extremely clear in the way they homage the classic westerns and cowboy movies of years gone by, but tell me that shots like this don't just make you want to stand up and cheer. Or maybe it's the way they use shadows to really evoke that sense of uneasiness in the shadowy underbelly of places like, Corellia. It intrigues us so much when we get down there. Or it could be the way they make the cramped cockpit feel like the most warm and inviting home you can imagine. I mean, Bradford Young is a wizard with the way he uses the camera to wordlessly tell us every step of Han's journey. But despite all that, maybe you want a film where every frame is essentially a painting. Then to look no further than Stephen Yedlin in Episode 8, The Last Jedi. I mean, there are so many points in this movie where you can't just help and gaze in adoration at what you're seeing on screen. Maybe it's the use of color or the use of space and balance to elicit every possible emotion that you have. I mean, there's a reason that the score-only version of this on Disney Plus is such a big hit with fans. Because if you have no words, music only, and the constructed images on screen, and you can get the story beats perfectly, then you know your cinematography is on point. It's funny how the literal composition of a film can be forgotten so much in an entirely visual medium. I mean, sure, great cinematography is a big deal for some people, but if you didn't know that about yourself and you like a lot of these movies, maybe it'll tell you some other films you might like outside of Star Wars. I mean, the Oscar for Best Cinematography might be a pretty good starting point. Before we go any further, we want to take a second to thank the sponsor of today's video, the United community at patreon.com/Youtini. If you join the United, you get to be a part of some of the best fans in the world. You'll also have access to all of our content we've ever made, including a bonus video every single week. Sometimes it's a little behind the scenes, sometimes it's a little something extra, but go ahead and head over to patreon.com/Youtini today. You become a monthly or an annual patron, which again is a much better deal, and join in on everything we have. 2024 is gonna be the biggest year for Youtini's Patreon we've ever had, so we'll see you over there at patreon.com/Youtini. And now, let's get back to the video. Lucas created Star Wars. He didn't just write a script, he didn't just cast the characters, he didn't just say action. I mean, technically, yes, he did do all those things, but maybe his most important contribution to the whole thing was his world building. World building is one of the most used buzzwords in fan communities nowadays, and for good reason. I mean, those of us that want to read stories that exist in worlds not our own need creators to make these straight out of their imagination. You know, like if you can't fully immerse yourself in the world of a story, it's gonna feel inauthentic. It'll feel like you're not there. Ideally, you want a place like Star Wars to feel so real that it feels like you're almost witnessing a piece of history that just happened to occur on another planet. Now, if you're a prequel kid like myself, you know we put a lot of emphasis on the world building. And we see that a lot in that whole trilogy, but perhaps nowhere clearer than in Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Because yes, while Episode 1 did introduce us to that era as a whole, Episode 2 is where we finally got to dive into Coruscant. We jumped right in there with fervor at the beginning of the movie. This was the center of galactic politics, and George didn't need to take time with dialogue to tell us what the Senate was like, how is the planet run, what does this look like, what is the bar made out of. He knew though, and that was so clear in the design and functionality of the entire planet. Everything in Attack of the Clones represents a fully realized universe. We're talking everything from the fashion that changes depending on the world you're on, to the vehicles that clearly each have a function. Like every part of Attack of the Clones is designed with intention and clarity that shows wonder and innovation. But prequel kids aren't the only ones to get extraordinary world building, and George wasn't the only one to do it either. Because yes, we do get introduced to the Rebel Alliance in the original trilogy, but we didn't get to see them with all their cracks exposed until Rogue One. Taking real-world warfare and plastering it onto such an alien world should be impossible when it comes to maintaining authenticity. And yet they do it pretty well. You know, I mean, these are not the rebels that we see in the original trilogy that are full of nobility and fervor, right? The rebels in Rogue One are people living under the threat of occupation. Every day is hard. They're just trying to survive, you know? They're not pretty and exciting like they were in the prequels. Life is very hard, and it's very unforgiving. Now, Attack of the Clones and Rogue One could not be more aesthetically diverse, and yet they occupy the same universe, and that is all thanks to consistent world building, right? And it's stuff like specificity and richness and world complexity is most important to you when it comes to finding your best Star Wars movie, and I'm pretty sure you have your answers. But we did say we had 5 factors to go over today, didn't we? Then it's only fitting that the final data we need for our search comes from the most intimate and the most personal part of Star Wars. Character work. Now, characters are necessary for every story, sure, but really sublime character work comes from change. Like, heroes never start out as heroes, you know? They're just regular people that accept the call and then rise to the occasion. And the best character work comes from seeing the best deeds and the worst deeds. And I think Star Wars is honestly at its best when we see both of those extremes through the eyes of the most important people in the galaxy. So let's start with the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker, shall we? Now, this can really apply to the entirety of the prequel trilogy, but specifically, I want to talk about Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Because the moment in this film where Anakin finally falls changes everything. Witnessing the fall of a hero is a very startling event in a story. And the dramatic irony in Revenge of the Sith is that we know Anakin's gonna fall. He has to become Vader, and there's nothing that any of us can do about it. You know, neither can Obi-Wan, neither can Padme, neither can anyone. And it's hard because we have this character who we have seen have so much potential and so much light in the first 2 acts of his story, and then knowing that his 3rd act has to happen with his descent into darkness, it stings. But it is okay. Because, as we know, we get to witness the end of Anakin's story. Like, yes, we do see him commit atrocities as Vader in the original trilogy, but then, if you know Anakin's story, you know where I'm going, we get to the most important part of his story, Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, also known as the redemption of Anakin Skywalker. I love these two films together because we get to see both sides of the mountain. We get to see the complete fall, and then we get to see the rise, both within the bounds of the same franchise. I mean, in Return of the Jedi, we get to see Anakin return to the light, we get to see him return to the mantle of fatherhood, and we get the conclusion, which is him becoming one with the living force, and it's all worth it. But that is not the only redemption that we're talking about today. Oh no. Because maybe that kind of thing reminds you of something in Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, specifically the redemption of Ben Solo. Ben Solo's arc in the sequels is one of the most gripping things about them. From the pure evil of killing his father in Episode 7 to Episode 9 where he fights off the Knights of Ren, he proves that light is never actually snuffed out and there's always a possibility to return to goodness. And it doesn't hurt to have Juilliard-trained Adam Driver giving that performance. It doesn't hurt one bit. Great character growth can be controversial. Change often is. But if you like these movies, there's a great chance that the idea of redemption rings true to you. Because it means the story isn't over. There's always possibility for light and for truth to return to the fold and blot out all the darkness. And I don't think there's anything more Star Wars than that. So where does that leave us? Is it possible now to tally up our findings and figure out the best Star Wars movie? Well, yes and no. I mean, everyone is going to have their rankings, right? I sure do, and as promised, here it is. But this will change, because art is subjective, you know? Maybe one week I'll want to focus on character work, the other week I want to focus on spectacle, but that will adjust as I do, because we all change, and we all evolve. Here at Utini, we firmly believe that compassion and understanding is key to everything, especially Star Wars. Like, do you have to like everything? Absolutely not. Nobody does. But if you really think you don't like a project, maybe this is a way to challenge yourself as to why. You know, is the world building a little hollow? Did the cinematography not hit for you? Do you not believe the character work? Ask yourself these questions, and maybe you'll find some answers, or maybe you'll realize that you do like this and there's something else at play. But in the meantime, do you have a best Star Wars movie? Have you finished your search? I want to know. Let us know in the comments down below. And if one of these factors is most important to you, I want to know that as well. Are you a person that loves world building? Do you really just get super invested in the spectacle of Star Wars? Let us know in the comments. I can't wait to hear from you. But in the meantime, may the Force be with you.